telling you flat out, you get absolutely no inheritance just because you're a woman, and, well, that's just not our custom.
Yeah, that is, I mean, it's brutal.
Right. And for a gone tribal woman named Daya, that wasn't just some hypothetical scenario. That one phrase basically kicked off this bruising 30-year family feud.
Oh, wow, 30 years.
30 years, yeah. Her brothers and uncles completely locked her out of her grandfather's land, and it was based entirely on, this unwritten tradition.
Which is a devastating reality for so many. And for decades, Daya and then later her kids, they fought this system that, well, it basically seems structurally rigged against them.
Exactly, and that is exactly why this deep dive is so crucial for you listening today. We're going on a journey into what happens when your community's tradition just fails you.
And the actual statutory law leaves this massive gaping hole.
Yes. We're looking at this huge 2025 Supreme Court judgment, Ram Charan versus Sukhram, which finally cut through this impossible legal knot.
Right, right. But to really get how a family dispute dragged on for 3 entire decades, we need to, deliberately slow down for a second. We have to look at the exact trap the lower courts fell into.
Because, well, initially you'd think a judge would just look at the standard inheritance law.
I don't think that, yeah.
But there's a catch. With the Hindu Succession Act, specifically Section 2, it explicitly says the standard rules do not apply to scheduled tribes.
Exactly. And it's really important to understand why that exemption is even there. It wasn't designed to be malicious.
Right. It's not a punishment.
No, not at all. It was put there to protect indigenous communities from having, majority mainstream laws forced over their unique cultural practices. The law intentionally steps back to respect tribal autonomy.
Okay, so it's like you're playing a high-stakes board game with your family. A huge dispute breaks out, and you flip open the official rule book to settle it.
Right.
But instead of an answer, the page for your specific scenario is just completely blank. The problem is, when there's no written rule, who actually decides how the game ends?
And that statutory void is exactly where things went incredibly wrong. The lower courts looked at that blank page and operated with what the Supreme Court later called a patriarchal predisposition.
Okay, wait, I really have to push back here.
Go ahead.
If the rule book is blank, and neither side can definitively prove what their tribal custom actually is, why did the courts default to the women getting absolutely zero?
Yeah, that is...
Why not just split the land 50-50? Defaulting to zero feels like an act of choice, right? Not just a passive gap.
That is the perfect question. And honestly, it's exactly the fatal flaw the Supreme Court pointed out.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The lower courts essentially told Daya's heirs, look, since the main law doesn't protect you, the burden is on you to prove a specific custom exists that allows women to inherit.
Wow. So they made her prove she could inherit, rather than making the men prove she couldn't.
Exactly. When the women couldn't produce ironclad proof of an unwritten rule, the courts just, defaulted to the men.
That is wild. So how does the Supreme Court actually fix that void? I mean, without just making up new rules out of thin air.
Well, they used a mechanism called purposive interpretation.
Okay, what does that mean in normal terms?
So instead of reading the law like a robot and saying, well, the text stops here, so we stop too, purposive interpretation means looking at the ultimate goal, the purpose of the entire legal system.
Ah, so they look at the spirit of the law rather than just the literal text on the page.
Precisely. They reached all the way back to an older law, the Central Provinces Laws Act of 1875.
Wow, 1875.
Yeah, quite old. But that law has a specific directive. It says when there is a gap and a custom is unproven, courts must decide based on justice, equity, and good conscience.
Which, I mean, that sounds great on paper, but honestly, good conscience could mean wildly different things depending on which judge is sitting at the bench that day.
It totally could. But the Supreme Court didn't just leave it vague. They anchored that concept directly to the Constitution.
Okay, how so?
They applied Article 14, which is the right to equality, and Article 15, the protection against sex discrimination.
Oh, I see. Meaning you can't just use an outdated, uncodified custom as some kind of shield to deny someone their fundamental rights.
Right.
If the custom is silent, the default setting has to be constitutional equality.
That's the core of it, yeah.
Yeah.
So Daya's heirs finally received their equal share.
Yeah.
Which is a massive victory on its own.
Huge.
But the ripple effect is what really changes the landscape for everyone else in similar situations.
Right, because this completely flips the script on how these cases work going forward.
Exactly.
If your family is trying to use vague traditions to cheat women out of property, equality is now the default roadblock. Vague traditions just won't cut it anymore.
And if you are practicing law, this is a total strategic reversal.
Because the burden of proof shifts, right?
Yes. The burden no longer falls on the female heirs to prove they can inherit. It falls entirely on the people trying to exclude them to prove that their discriminatory custom is actually legally valid.
You just use the Constitution to fill those voids in the uncodified tribal laws?
Yep. It's a definitive ruling. It establishes that equality always overrides gender discrimination.
It really does rewrite the rulebook entirely,
Yeah.
which, leaves me thinking about that blank page again.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because if uncodified customs must now definitively bow to constitutional equality, you just have to wonder how many other unspoken family rules across the country are currently operating illegally without anyone even realizing it.